there's a new book out that's about starting your own company, and in particular, it focuses on small food businesses. If you're thinking that maybe you'd like to start your own small food business, maybe you're someone who makes jam every year and end up giving it away rather than selling it, or you're always rocking up to family occasions and christenings and so on, carrying a pie or an apple tart or something. Well, how about earning some money from producing food? And it's everything that you need to know, or it'll show you where to find it. It's called More Money for Jam, the essential guide to starting your own small food business in Ireland, Northern Ireland or Great Britain. And its author is a woman who has worked in the food industry for over 25 years, and she facilitates and supports programs for the food sector, as well as providing mentoring and consultancy services, and joins us now on the line. Oonagh Monahan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, John. Lovely to be here.
Good to talk to you. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening in, and they do a bit of cooking, and as I was describing there, they bring it along here and there, and they look on maybe enviously when they go along to a food fair or a market or whatever, and think, well, I could do that, and they never make the move. Well, if they do ever make the move, this would be the book for them, because it goes through in great detail everything that you would need to know. And there's a lot that you need. I know it might sound simple, say something like making jam, but there is a lot that you need to know.
There is. I always say that the making of the food bit is the easy part, actually, of setting up a food business, because people go into it because they enjoy making food, or they like to work with food, or they've had some issue that they've decided they need to start making things themselves because they can't get they can't find what they need in the shops. But it's everything else around that, kind of the running of the food business and the specifics of, well, first of all, running a business, but specifically running a food business that can kind of pose challenges to people and put them off, or just put the frighteners on them a little bit. Yeah. And what I'm trying to do is to kind of address those issues.
Now, it'll all start with an idea of whatever particular product, whatever particular food. But then there's different stages that you have to go through, because you have to develop that idea and develop the product, and then get it to market, and you have to deal with regulations about food safety and hygiene. In fact, to look through the chapters in your book, if somebody had a half an idea, they'd go, "Oh, you know what? There's just too much to it." But in reality, it's great, because if you get the book and read it carefully, you can avoid all sorts of mistakes.
Well, I certainly hope I can help you avoid the mistakes. I mean, the thing is always to break it down into steps. So the first thing you have to think about is, well, what is it you want to make? That's, that might sound like an obvious thing, but what is it that you want to make? And is there a market for it in the area that you want to sell it in? So you might be thinking about your local town or village, or you might be thinking bigger than that. But always the first thing with food or anything else that you're going to do is anybody out there going to buy it? Does anybody want it? Okay. And, where are they? How do I get my food to them? But kind of once you've decided that there is a market, there is a kind of a gap in the market, that there's nobody locally doing what you want to do, or nobody that you can't get the product that you want to buy for yourself or your family, then you have to remember that you're selling a food that people are going to eat. So you want to make sure that it's done properly, that it's done safely, and that it's done in a clean environment, that you're not going to pose any difficulties to somebody's health, for example, by selling a food that might not be up to scratch from a hygiene point of view. So that's really important. And that's where, getting registered sooner rather than later is vital. It's a legal requirement, honestly. And I've come across some producers that have set up and have started to sell, and they've been maybe selling at a market, and somebody comes along and spots them, and then they check up on them, and they're kind of on the back foot as a result of it. So you're far better off to come clean. You want the ref to be on side with you always. So make sure the environmental health officer or the Department of Agriculture person, or whoever it is that you have to register with, knows about you sooner rather than later, because they'll help you. They'll help you do everything that you need to do.
And you might look at the market and think, well, there's no room for my product. So I suppose you do have to do your homework and find a gap, because in the average supermarket, there's everything. Well, you think there's everything. But it's amazing. There's always new food products. There's always new types of whatever it is, and the better ones succeed.
They do, and because they've found some sort of an angle, maybe, or an edge to the bigger producers or the more long established producers. If you were to take something like yogurt, for example, you look at the yogurt aisle in any supermarket, like it's half the length of the shop. It's absolutely huge. Whereas small yogurt producers might be able to say, well, we make this on our own farm, we make it with our own hands, we've got a specialized herd of particularly good, cattle, um, or that it's, got special flavors in it or something. So
Hmm.
people still want to buy from small artisan producers rather than the big producers. They feel that kind of connection to the small producer. So having some sort of an angle is really important. And a lot of people like to buy Irish rather than buying from something that's imported. So
Yeah.
that's also a good angle to use. If you look at something like, say, jam, even, there's a lot of jam in the market. You might say, well, there's no room for any new jam producers, but there has been. And one of the really good case studies actually in the book is Moran's Mega Jam in Cavan. And they have really nice recipes just with a bit of an angle. So it's strawberry, but it's strawberry and Prosecco. It's pineapple jam with Malibu. It's, nice little recipe tweaks
We
that make it
twist.
more interesting. And they taste great because there's loads of fruit in them. So ultimately everything comes down to the taste, the flavor, and will somebody buy it again? So even though, like I always say to people, it could be your granny's recipe or it could be 5 generations old recipe, but if it doesn't taste great, nobody's going to buy it a second time. So the story on its own isn't enough as an angle. It has to taste really good.
Okay, ultimately, when it's food, it has to taste good and it has to look like it tastes good.
Yeah, it has to appeal. It definitely has to be appealing to the eye. So how food is presented is really important. Even how you put it, the kind of packaging you might use. Like sometimes for some foods, people like to see the product through the packaging. They don't want it to be covered up. Some foods are more kind of, lend themselves to that better than others. But if you can use nice, attractive packaging, even to attract people for their eye to catch it on the shelf, that's the key thing with it.
And with all the packaging and the marketing, which we haven't even touched on, and the regulations, the hygiene and so on, there's an awful lot to it. But if you get it right, there's great satisfaction and great rewards.
There are, I mean, I would say one thing is people generally don't get into the food industry for the money because you work really hard at this. Getting the food out there, getting it onto people's shelves, dealing with supermarkets, distributing your foods all over the country or exporting abroad. Like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work. So you get into it because you enjoy it and you love it. And that is where people really why they stick at this and why they really want to work in the food sector because they love it. They like working with food and they like working with people. And that's really what it comes down to. That's what a lot of the rewards are. And for people to come back to you and say, I bought that. I really loved it. It was fantastic. To get that kind of feedback from your customers really gives people a boost and, really gives them encouragement to keep going in their business.
So that's the first thing. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. You have to be passionate about cooking and passionate about your product.
You definitely do. And I have to say, passion isn't a word that I'd use very lightly because it can be bandied around a lot. People seem to be passionate about everything at the moment. But I think generally, when it comes to the food sector, you have to be passionate about doing what you do because you won't stick at it otherwise. Because the rewards are there, but the work has to go into it. No question about it.
Um, there's a lot of stuff on TV anymore, and you see this is based on real life. And I think when it comes to food products, it's great to have a story, even if it's if it's loosely true, but have some sort of a story that people can relate to.
Yeah, definitely. Even if it's something like, we have our own, like again, one of the other case studies in the book is down in Mayo, Velvet Cloud sheep's milk yogurt. And it's their farm. So their story is about the farmland and how the farmers through the generations and how the whole family are involved in it. Or it could be a story of, like another case study is Rustic Buwa. It's a bakery down in Tralee and it's a Polish family and how they moved here 20 years ago and have made their life in Ireland and have got into business in Ireland and how much they love living here and, setting up their business here. So that story, that personal touch is always a really good one. Or it could be that you're making some sort of gluten-free product because you couldn't get good quality gluten-free because one of your family members has got celiac disease, for example. So those kinds of personal stories, that backstory, if you like, that you hear about all the time in X Factor, that really is something that people like to identify with. The whole thing you see now as well about even the larger retailers will use the name of their producer on their labels for their own brand product because they know that the customers, the consumers want to identify with the producer. They want to know who they are and to, make that personal connection. So that whole story about, where the thing is made, where, why you got into the business, about people's families, giving something of yourself in that story really does help you kind of connect with your customer.
And sometimes would it be a good idea to think small rather than too big to start out with? In other words, if you can get your product into markets and small cafes, rather than thinking about onto the shelves of supermarkets, that you might have a better chance of getting a foothold.
Well, I'll never be one to curb somebody's ambition, but I think realism is important here as well, and being realistic as to what you can service as a producer. So I remember I had a client a number of years ago, and they'd started off pretty small like that in their local area. And then they got listed with a retailer, and suddenly it boomed. And 6 months later, they're in 60 shops, and they were really struggling to keep up with production. So they said that to me afterwards, they kind of did try to run before they could walk.
Yeah.
So sometimes taking that in a bit more of a structured fashion, kind of making sure that you're able to service that market, because if you can't, if the shelves are empty where your product should be, the retailer will drop you. So you want to make sure that you're in a good, strong position first and try things out. I mean, I always think the farmers markets are a great starting point for foods if they're the appropriate foods for there, because you get great feedback from the consumer. You can have a chat with your customers, people who come regularly. You can try out new recipes and that kind of thing on them and try it out there.
Yeah.
You can expand then into some local shops. Maybe you get into some online orders and do some local deliveries, but definitely starting off at that kind of, as I say, baby steps, really, just to get yourself going. But have a plan. If you do want to get international distribution, if you do want to export, do it, but plan it in a way that you know that you can manage it and that you can achieve it.
Sustainable. This is the third edition of this book, Oonagh,
Yeah.
and you've been working in the industry and helping various startups and food businesses for 25 years. So if you were to just bring it all down to a few, excuse the pun, key ingredients for success, what would they be?
My top tips.
Yeah.
My top tips, I think the first thing is to do your research, to make sure there's a market out there for your foods, that just because you think it's a great idea or your family thinks it's a great idea might not be a great idea where you are. The second thing I would say is make sure you develop your recipes properly, that you can achieve the shelf life that you want, that your shelf life isn't too short. Otherwise, you're going to find your foods are going off very quickly and you're not, you could end up losing a lot of money that way. And the third thing, which is the one that people hate doing, is mind the money, look at the finances, do your cash flow, keep an eye on your costs and watch it all the time. It's the one thing that people are kind to be a little bit weak on because it's not the most enjoyable job in the world. Yeah. But if you're not making money at this, if you're not even breaking even, then you're running a charity and you have to think about, why am I in this? So minding that is really important. But I'd say market research, minding the money, and recipe development would be the three top ones.
Okay. Well, the book is out now. It's called More Money for Jam. This is the third edition. It's in all good bookshops, and I presume it can be ordered online as well. And
indeed, can I just say it's actually in the Four Masters bookshop in Donegal town. Okay. Definitely in Donegal. I'm not too sure. I haven't got the list of all the bookshops that it's in, but I know for a fact it's in the Four Masters.
Well, I'd imagine there's Neeson's here in Letterkenny and other shops dotted around the northwest as well. Oonagh, the best of luck with the book. Thanks for having a chat with us.
No, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed that.
Get with the best. Virgin Media, Ireland's best broadband with